Good morning, everyone. We are going to get started. It is 9:01 a.m., and today we will be going over amendments to Site Remediation Reform Act. Next slide, please. My name is Carly DeLuca, and I will be co-moderating today's training with Ryan Callahan. Both of us are a part of the Contaminated Site Remediation and Redevelopment Training Committee. Next slide, please. Today's training has been approved for 2 regulatory continuing education credits. There is an attendance requirement that must be met in order to receive credits. In order to receive the CEC credits, participants must be logged in for the entire session and answer 2 out of the 3 poll questions, which will be randomly inserted throughout the presentation. If any issues arise while answering the poll questions, please notify us via chat and questions function. Next slide, please. Once this training is over, the DEP will provide the LSRPA a list of eligible participants for CECs. The LSRPA will then reach out to you individually with instructions on how to access the certificates. Certificates will be issued by the LSRPA after paying a $25 processing fee. Next slide, please. This is an example of a test poll. As previously mentioned, test polls are randomly inserted throughout today's training. Again, this is just an example, so no participation is required. When a test poll does come up, there should be a pop-up screen that appears. From there, you may submit your answer. It does not matter if you answer the question right or wrong, you just have to answer. Next slide, please. Within GoToWebinar's toolbar, there is a questions function. Please ask any questions you have for presenters at any time during the presentation. These will be addressed during the question segments. If questions are not addressed during a question segment of the presentation, it will be answered after the presentation. Questions should be brief and general, and also please refrain from case-specific questions. Next slide, please. Please don't forget to fill out the course evaluation. The course evaluation could be accessed using the URL below and will also be entered into the chat. Next slide, please. Your job for this training is to participate by asking questions and completing polls, in addition to providing feedback via the course evaluation. Next slide, please. Up next, we have Rebecca Hollander from the LSRPA. Next slide.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd just like to thank the DEP for providing these excellent training opportunities for site remediation professionals and allowing the LSRPA to support them in their efforts. So I just want to get that right off the bat. Next slide, please. Our presenters for today are listed here on the slide: Lynn Mitchell, Amy De Silva, Greg Newman, Rafael Rivera, Jennifer McLeod, Jessica Schwartz, Donald Kramer, and as Carly said, the moderators are her and Ryan. Next slide, please. The LSRPA couldn't do all the work that it does without the support of our many sponsors. So here on the slide are a list of the LSRPA's Diamond partners and Platinum partners. And so I'd like to just extend a warm thank you to all of them for supporting the LSRPA and all that we do. Next slide, please. And here we have our gold sponsors. So again, thank you to all of the LSRPA sponsors, because again, without them, we couldn't provide the training that we do, the events that we do. And so they're a huge part of our ability to serve our community. Next slide, please. And here are our silver sponsors, so thank you to them as well. Next slide. The DE&I committee is, we're committed to DE&I, and this slide recognizes that we work within a world where people's brains think, learn, and process information differently. And teams can benefit from a wide range of skills. So, this is an excellent representation of, neurodiversity. So, again, everybody knows somebody who could be somebody who thinks differently, and it's, we all have a spot. And so, again, DE&I is super important for the LSRPA and super important for me personally. So next slide, please. Here's some upcoming LSRPA classes. Tomorrow we have the training for childcare centers, so I think you can still register if you haven't yet. Upcoming in 2026, we have the January 15th SARA amendments, key rule updates. We have the January 20th LSRPA regulatory roundtable, the February 5th due diligence class. So, highly recommend joining these courses, get your credits, learn more information, super helpful. Next slide, please. This is our save the date for our annual conference. It is March 25th and 26th at the Hyatt in New Brunswick. So, be sure you put those dates on your calendar. The conference is a great way to network. There's always really good courses. Highly recommend everybody, comes to the conference. Next slide, please. Super important. Our annual meeting is in January this year. It's January 8th. It's a short meeting from 4 to 5:30. So we would love to get a lot of participation from the LSRPs in the LSRPA. So let's get registered and let's show up. All right, let's get a good turnout this year. Next slide, please. You can stay connected through the LSRPA through our different social media, our LinkedIn, our X account. I don't think we have Instagram, but next slide, please. Oh, that's it. Oh, if you're not a member of the LSRPA, please join. I think that there are a number of LSRPs who aren't actually part of the LSRPA, and so there's a lot of great benefits to being part of the LSRPA. So if you're not a member, I highly recommend that you join. Next slide, please. Yep. Thank you very much, and hope everybody enjoys the training today. And thanks again to the DEP and all the presenters.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So up next, we have Lynn Mitchell, the Assistant Director with the Remediation Review Element. Lynn, you could take it away.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Good morning, everybody. I am Lynn Mitchell, the Assistant Director, and also the Rule Manager for all of the changes and the revisions to ARCs and the tech regs. Next slide, please. I'd like to start by thanking my rule team, which includes Judy Andreyko, Amy De Silva, Sam Gleisner, Rafael Rivera, and Jessica Schwartz. Without them, this would not be possible, and I appreciate their efforts. And I also would like to thank Greg, Jen, and Don for their help in their parts of the rule that you will be hearing from later. And next slide, please. So what we will be covering today is a general history and minor rule changes, which I'll be going over. Changes to the tech regs, which will be discussed by Amy. Greg will be going over alt fill. We'll be discussing changes to ARCs. That will be Raphael. Jen will be going over RFS. Jessica will be going over the changes to the appendices in ARCs, and Don will be going over the GIS. Next slide, please. What we will not be covering during today's training. There was a notice of proposed substantial change published on November 17th for 1.7 and 2.4 of ARCs. We cannot discuss anything besides what is on this slide. The public hearing will be on December 17th at 1 p.m. and the public comment period ends on January 16th, 2026. Because we're in the open comment period, we cannot discuss anything. Chapter 7 of ARCs, which includes the remedial action permit changes, there is a 90-day delayed implementation from November 17th. So we will be putting on our training in February. All of the changes regarding the permitting process are not in the courtesy copy that you have online because they are not in effect for another 90 days. When they are in effect on February 15th, the courtesy copy will be updated with all of that information. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of the people who worked on that part of the rule, and I will thank them again at the next training, but Zach Kaplan, Nicole Collegian, Alex Ionon, we couldn't have done this without you, as well as the many people from BRAP who have worked hard, including Mike Gaudio, Crystal Prozek, Al Shokanazev, Julian Posey, and Rob Hall. Next slide, please. So A brief history of our process here. SARA 2.0 became effective on August 23rd, 2019. We held numerous stakeholder meetings, and the rule finally appeared in the register in October 2024. We had a public hearing, and then we had the public comment period extended through January 31st, 2025, and the final rule changes appeared in the November 17th, 2025 register. That is where you can find all of the changes to subchapter 7 and all references to those changes. Next slide, please. So some general changes were made throughout ARCs and the tech regs, and instead of having mention them every single time they occur, I'm just going to go over them now. Very simple ones. We changed impact to groundwater to the migration to groundwater exposure pathway. Vapor intrusion screening levels were changed to the indoor air remediation standards. Most paper copies were removed. Department of Health was changed to now be the Department of Health from the Department of Health and Senior Services. We removed all references to MOAs, and we updated our program's name. Next slide. So some important information to pay attention when you're going over the rules is, over our slides, is that red indicates that text was deleted from the rule. Bold means that new text was added. Yellow highlight is stuff that we thought was important. And bulleted information is our notes for what our interpretation, what we thought that you should take away from the rule text, except for when Jessica discusses the model deed notice, because that language actually has bullets in it, and we had to keep it that way. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So now we're going to open it up for some questions. If you have any questions, please drop them in the questions section of the chat. And I will give everyone a few minutes to type in some questions before we move on.
Yeah, this is an opportunity if anybody had questions on what we were not covering and why, I just wanted to have this opportunity so we can focus then on everything else. If there are no questions, we can move on.
All right, we're just going to move on. I'm not seeing any questions popped in up here. Okay, so next.
So good morning. My name is Amy De Silva. I'm with the Bureau of Field Operations, the Northern Section. I'll be going over the changes made to the technical requirements for site remediation. Next slide, please.
Okay.
I'll go through the changes in order that they appear in the rule text. On some slides, I'll pause for a few seconds before proceeding to the next slide to allow you to read the information, as I won't be reading the rule word for word. In section 1.7, the technical requirements discuss the rules which cannot get a variance. Even though there is a deletion here, bracketed and in red, you still cannot ask for a variance for importing hazardous waste as fill material. It is just now covered under 1.7b7 instead of 1.7b8. Next slide, please. Test your knowledge.
It is now time for our first test poll question. Remember, you have about a minute to answer the following question. True or false, you could ask for a variance for importing hazardous waste as fill material. It has been about a minute. Next slide, please. The answer is B, false. I will now turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you. There are a few changes to the definition section. Many of the changes were completed due to the recent amendments to the Site Remediation Reform Act, also referred to as SARA 2.0. Contaminated site, for instance, added language to expressly state that contaminated site means, including the location where the discharge originated and all other locations of environmental media impacted by the migration of the discharge. This updated definition clarifies that contamination tracking includes delineation through any and all properties that the contamination plume passes through. Direct contact, this is a new definition, and it means soil remediation standards for the soil ingestion dermal and soil inhalation exposure pathways. Next slide, please. The immediate environmental concern definition. added unoccupied structures to ensure that all pertinent structures, occupied or unoccupied, are evaluated for an IEC condition. Next slide, please. Donor area of concern and receiving area of concern are both new definitions. These were added to clarify terms used in the alternative fill section, to be discussed by Greg Newman after my presentation. Next slide, please. The definition of remediation was amended to add "or any portion thereof" to mirror SARA 2.0. Next slide, please. Immediate environmental concern requirements. Although this information is already required by the existing rule, the department is including a more descriptive language to explain that the IEC form requires a summary and a status of the source investigation, identifying potential contaminant source areas that are contributing to the IEC. Next slide, please. Since the definition of IEC now contains unoccupied structures, to ensure that all unoccupied structures are evaluated for an IEC condition, the department has created a carve-out for situations where the building, number 1, is not occupied, number 2, will not be occupied, and number 3 will be demolished. If all 3 of these statements are true and certified by the property owner, then no further remediation relative to the IEC in the unoccupied structure shall be required, provided that the conditions of the certification are maintained. Please be advised that there needs to be a scheduled date of demolition. The building demolition certification form link is included on this slide. Next slide, please. The term for a contaminated site has been deleted to ensure that all receptors, regardless of location, shall be evaluated. Next slide, please. The phrase door-to-door was removed since the rules from the rules since there are different acceptable approaches to completing a receptor evaluation. You don't have to physically knock on each door. However, each property must be evaluated. Next slide, please. Indoor air remediation standards were adopted in 2021. The rule specifies that a receptor evaluation of the vapor intrusion pathway shall be conducted when indoor air contamination is detected at concentrations that exceed the indoor air remediation standards. Next slide, please. Here, language was added to specify the media to investigate: soil, groundwater, soil gas, indoor air, or a combination as appropriate. Also added the indoor air remediation standards in number 2. Next slide, please. Indoor air samples collected from a child care facility or an educational facility are to be submitted to the New Jersey Department of Health, even if those results are non-detect. The Department of Health wants the results via email. Their mailing address was deleted from the rules. Next slide, please. Added indoor air investigation requirements to the site investigation section to ensure that all receptors are being fully evaluated. Next slide, please. Added the soil remediation standards for the migration to groundwater exposure pathway. You can either in number 1, assume that the residential direct contact soil remediation standards and the applicable soil remediation standards for the migration to groundwater exposure pathway exceed, and assume that groundwater standards are exceeded. Or in number 2, it states that you can sample the soil and groundwater to determine the standards that are exceeded, ensuring that migration to groundwater exposure pathway standards are included in this evaluation. Next slide, please. Added language to the remedial investigation section to ensure that receptors are being fully evaluated. The contaminants exceeding the migration to groundwater pathway standards must be delineated in the unsaturated zone. Next slide, please. This change incorporated the department's remedial investigation complete policy statement, which has been in effect for some time now. Essentially, this addition clarified in the rules that extrapolation cannot be used in the remedial action phase or for the remedial investigation of receptors. All receptors must be fully delineated. Next slide, please. This is a very similar change to the previous slide. The previous slide was for the remedial investigation of soil in 4.2, and this is for the remedial investigation of groundwater in 4.3. Added this to ensure that all receptors are being fully evaluated. And again, clarifying that extrapolation can be used. However, it cannot be used in the remedial action phase or for the remedial investigation of receptors. Next slide, please. Added the requirement of vapor intrusion investigations to the remedial investigation section. This is not a change in the existing requirements, as the vapor intrusion investigation was already required in this instance. However, prior to these amendments, it was not discussed in this section specifically, and now it is. Next slide, please. The person responsible for conducting the remediation, or the PRCR, shall implement a remedial action when any applicable remediation standard or ecological risk-based remediation goal is exceeded. And again, clarifying that extrapolation cannot be used in the remedial action phase. Next slide, please. The PRCR shall file a deed notice when implementing a soil remedial action where the residual contaminant concentrations remaining will exceed either the residential direct contact soil remediation standards or the applicable soil remediation standards for the migration to groundwater exposure pathway, or both if they both exceed. In addition, a deed notice must be recorded when implementing an alternative remediation standard pursuant to N.J.A.C. 726D, Appendices 6 and 7, requiring the use of an institutional control and a remedial action permit. Next slide, please. Specified in the remedial action section that the PRCR shall retain a licensed site remediation professional for the duration of a remedial action permit. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And now I'll turn it over to Greg Newman.
Okay, thank you, Carly. Good morning, everybody. This is Greg Newman with the Bureau of Environmental Evaluation and Risk Assessment. I'm also co-chair of the Bill Material Guidance Committee. And I'm just going to cover some of the changes to the tech rules as a result of the revision. Next slide, please. Okay, so just an overview to kind of give you the scope of what I'll be covering today. The previous version of the technical requirements describe the triggers, if you will, for DEP written pre-approval for the use of both off-site as well as on-site alternative fill. Please note that there were no changes made to the three triggers for the use of off-site alternative fill. However, there were some changes made to the triggers for the use of on-site alternative fill, which this presentation will focus on. Additionally, please note that there was some language added to clarify that alternative fill, whether from an on-site or off-site source, may not be placed in any clean areas of the site. Next slide. Okay, so this slide, documents that alternative fill cannot be placed at a clean area of the site. And I'll give you guys a few seconds to read through some of this language here that's bolded. So again, the above language clarifies that alternative fill may only be placed at areas of concern and that the placement of alternative fill at a clean area is prohibited. And just to clarify, an area of concern is one that is documented to contain a contaminant at a concentration greater than a soil remediation standard. Next slide. Okay, on to the triggers. All right, this slide explains that the use of on-site alternative fill that does not require pre-approval. So again, I'll leave you guys a few seconds here to read through this language. So to summarize, DEP written pre-approval is not required if the on-site donor material complies with the like-on-like and the contaminant 75th percentile at the receiving area of concern. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide documents the need for written pre-approval when the donor material complies with the like-on-like, but does not comply with the 75th percentile. So again, I'll give you guys a few seconds to read through this language. Okay, so just to restate, DEP written pre-approval is required if the on-site donor material complies with the like-on-like, but it does not comply with the 75th percentile of a contaminant at the receiving AOC. The need for pre-approval for not complying with the 75th percentile is a new trigger, so this was not a trigger present in the prior version. Additionally, please note that the technical information that needs to be submitted pursuant to a variance at section 1.7 in the tech rule needs to be included in the written pre-approval process and report. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide documents the need for written pre-approval when like-on-like is not being achieved and also describes the conditions that must be met. Please note the "and" at the end of this slide as the conditions continue on to the next slide. So again, I'll give you guys a few seconds to read through this. Okay, next slide. Please note the condition here at the top in bold. It's part of 3II. Okay, so again, to summarize, DEP written pre-approval is required if the contaminants in the donor material are not the same from the contaminants present at the receiving AOC. The like-on-like is not being achieved. The alternative fill being moved from the donor AOC must result in the creation of a clean area and a reduction of 25% of the areal extent at the donor area of concern. Okay, next slide. And that pretty much ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. We'll now begin the second question segment of the webinar. Please remember you could enter any questions you have in the questions function of the GoToWebinar. So we have a few questions here. I'll start off with the first question here. For the alternative fill, only an AOC, if one AOC is site-wide historic fill and we've documented it, does exceed standards, does that mean alternative fill could be placed anywhere on site, assuming all other requirements are met?
Yes, if your AOC has been properly characterized and it extends across your entire site, then that would be viewed as an area of concern which could receive alternative fill.
Okay, the next question we have here, does 726E-1.11b require that a specific date for the demolition be provided? Neither the statute or the rules so provide.
I believe on the form it will ask for the date of demolition.
Okay, thank you for helping me out there, Amy.
Yeah, that was one of my slides. So.
Yeah.
Okay, next question here. Where can we find more information about the 75th percentile of a contaminant?
So good question. There's an excellent discussion of that in the fill guidance document as in terms of how to calculate the 75th percentile, how it, it's specified that each area of concern that's representing a receiving AOC is to have its own 75th percentile. So again, the guidance supports the rule, so I would, point you to the fill guidance. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to, shoot me an email as a contact.
Okay. Okay, next question here. What would be the expected turnaround for pre-approval of fill material?
So again, that's something that we speak to in the guidance document. We have what we consider a soft 45-day review window, and by that I mean we're not under a clock like a land use permit, but to date we've been able to meet that time frame when pre-approvals have been submitted that are administratively complete.
Okay. The next question is, to whom at CSRR do we direct a pre-approval request?
You could send them right to me.
Okay. The next is, what is the expected time frame for DEP approval?
We just covered that.
Sorry.
So that's okay.
Okay, the next question here is, did the presenter say that migration to groundwater exceedances only now require a deed notice?
Okay, I think we're going back to the prior presentation.
No, if you're going to leave them there, it would require a deed notice, but you should still investigate groundwater. Any of those rules haven't changed.
Okay. Does alternative fill from an offsite source always require N.J.A.C pre-approval?
Not if the alternative fill concentrations comply with the 75th percentile and the like on like at the receiving AFC. And you're not using it above pre-remediation topography. So again, we're going back to the 3 triggers for pre-approval. Those did not change. So the 3 triggers that I just mentioned, were in play during the current rule and if adopted as such, the new rule.
Okay, our next question here is, when do the new tech regs go into effect, and is there a grace period that applies?
I'll defer to the others on this call in terms of the exact timing. I'm not sure of them.
As far as I know, well, they have been published, so as far as I know, you start using it now. Maybe Lynn could answer if there's any kind of grace period for anything.
I believe she's currently having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will answer that via email.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next question here regarding migration to groundwater pathway and historic fill investigations. Does the migration to groundwater pathway require an RI/RA in historic fill investigations now?
I'm not really clear on the question. Maybe we could get their information and we'll get back to them.
Okay. The next is, if the date of the demolition changes, how do you notify DEP? Is there a new certification required?
I would think to just resubmit a new form if it changes.
This question is regarding Amy's presentation, and it's, can you clarify if delineation of migration to groundwater exceedances is ever required in the saturation zone?
The rules say in the unsaturated zone. So a groundwater investigation would then be triggered though.
Okay, the next question here is, if an ARS is developed for an inhalation standard, is a D notice/RAP now required if all data is below the new inhalation ARS?
I think that would be a question for Lynn. It's too bad she's having technical difficulties. Could you repeat it one more time?
If an ARS is developed for an inhalation standard, is a deed notice / RAP now required if all data is below the new inhalation ARS?
Yeah, I'll have to defer that one, so we'll get back to you.
And the next question here is, when assuming historic fill is contaminated and there's no sampling, must we now assume it exceeds the migration MGW SRS and must use engineering controls if applicable?
Yes, if you're going under that assumption, yeah, you're assuming groundwater's contaminated and you're assuming that the migration of groundwater standards are exceeded.
Okay. How far into the future can the demolition time for a structure for VI happen?
I mean, I don't have an exact date on that. I would think as far as if all three things are happening, it's not occupied, it will not be occupied, and there is a date for demolition, then I think you would be okay. We didn't set a certain time frame.
Okay. What is the time frame for building demolition which would preclude VI evaluation of an unoccupied, dilapidated building?
I believe you still have to do the evaluation. It's just you wouldn't have to complete the you wouldn't have to go forward with remediation if you did find an IEC in an unoccupied structure. You would still have to do the investigation of the unoccupied structure.
Will the N.J.A.C permit use of alternative fill up to the N.J.A.C proposed flood in the real rules or limit the use of alternative fill to the FEMA 100-year flood elevation?
Yeah, that hasn't been determined yet. You know, we realize that the real rules have been proposed, but until they're formally adopted, we really don't know what the landscape will be in terms of how those rules will influence the tech rules as well as the fill guidance. So, yet to be determined.
Donor site fill material that is segregated and characterized as certified clean fill can be imported to receiving sites without any pre-approval as it is clean fill.
So there is no certified clean fill definition. We do allow an LSRP to rely on authorized quarry material, and if the LSRP opts to not sample that, then that could be imported under the LSRP's oversight. If donor material is characterized and sampled as per the fill guidance, and those results show that they comply with the most stringent soil remediation standards, then that material would meet the definition of clean and would not require pre-approval for importation.
Specifically, does that change the need to obtain a RAP when a site-specific depth range is used for the inhalation ARS?
That was similar to the other question, so we're going to have to get back to you on that one.
If you assume that historic fill is contaminated, do you need to establish an engineering control to address the migration to groundwater pathway?
I believe so, and that was one of the similar question from before, yes.
Delineation.
Carly, real quick, it's Raphael. I mean, some of those questions relating to RAPs, those could be deferred to the RAP training that's scheduled for sometime in February. So anything associated with permits, probably that training session will be better platform to answer. So, you know, if you see any questions regarding permits, maybe just skip those for now. and then we can address them during the permit training, subchapter 7.
Okay.
Good point, Raphael. Thank you.
Does delineation need to be completed to the migration MGW in the unsaturated zone before applying compliance attainment methods?
So I'll answer that question. The answer is yes.
Are there limitations to types of contaminants that may be present in historic fill?
Again, I'm going to defer the answer to that question. That would be better answered in the RAP training.
Can you confirm that a low permeability cap will be required as an engineering control for historic fill now, since MGW is assumed to be exceeded?
Again, that's another RAP question, so I'm going to defer that until the RAP training, as the implementation isn't going forward with the RAP permits yet.
If dilapidated buildings fall within a VI trigger distance but is deemed unsafe to enter for a VI investigation, how should this be addressed?
I mean, if it's, I would say to talk to the department, if you have a case manager, or if you could talk to somebody. But, we don't want you to go into an unsafe building. So
if historical fill is regional and soil and groundwater are assumed to be contaminated without sampling, and engineering and institutional controls will be implemented, the comparison to ecological screening criteria is not possible. Is ecological evaluation required?
I'm going to defer that question too.
Okay, the next question here is an engineering control required for historic fill contaminants in excess of residential SRS and MGW SRS only?
It looks like Lynn is unmuted. Let's see if,
Hi, sorry, I
There you
have
are.
lost internet. Can you hear me?
yes.
All right. So can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I'm going to answer it correctly. Actually, I can read. Is an engineering control required for historic fill contamination in excess of SRS of the residential soil remediation standard? Yes. And MGW? Yes. Now you have to be below, you need an engineering control if you're above either one.
This question is, please can all the questions and answers be posted after the presentation?
Yeah, the presentation, our answers to these will be posted as part of the training, and the ones that are not answered during this training are, we reply to the person who asked the question individually.
Okay, and we're coming up on time here, so this will conclude the question segment. Now I'll introduce Rafael Rivera.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Rafael Rivera. I'm a section chief with the Bureau Case Assignment and Initial Notice, and a member of the Rule Committee. Today I'll be covering the amendments to the administrative requirements for the remediation of contaminated sites, ARCs, which were made to incorporate the changes enacted under the Site Remediation Reform Act we know as SARA 2.0. During this session, I will walk through each subchapter in order. However, I will be skipping some subchapters that will be covered later in this training or future training session. Next slide, please. Right, starting with subchapter 1, 2 new definitions were added to 1.3, remedial action permit and retain. The definition retain was adopted directly from SARA 2.0 to ensure consistency. You will notice that hired was replaced with retained throughout the ARCS rule. The term remedial action permit was also added to distinguish between the various types of permits issued under the program. The different types of permits will be discussed in a future training session. We'll give folks a few seconds to kind of skim through the definitions. right, next slide. Right, as Lynn previously noted, every attempt was made to eliminate paper submissions. As a result, 1.6b was updated, which requires all submissions be made electronically. The department specifically requested paper submission. Many required submissions can be completed through available online services. For those submissions that do not have an online service, please submit documents to SRP submissions at dep.nj.gov. Please note that certain submissions that require a check must be mailed in, such as a permit by rule, initial RFS, linear construction forms, to name a few. I'm sure there's some other ones out there that I didn't mention, but if forms accompanied by a check, we prefer you mail those in. I mean, you can still submit them electronically, but follow up with the form and the check. This way they don't get separated, and we know what the check is for. Okay, next slide. Continuing with 1.6b, a paper copy of the full laboratory deliverables is not required unless specifically requested by the department. So I'm sure everyone will be happy about that. So I'll give you a few seconds here, but that's basically what this slide shows. All right, next slide. All right, 1.7d was updated from confirmed discharge notification to the appropriate form to account for historic fill, which requires submission of the case creation form if the issue is not being addressed under an existing case. The current CDN online service requires an incident number to proceed. Since historic fill is not required to be reported to the hotline, it prevents the creation of a case for historic fill using the online service. So that was one of the reasons we changed to confirm discharge notification to appropriate form. So I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, next slide. All right, so 1.7, the person conducting remediation is required to respond to any written or oral requests from the public regarding the status of the remediation. There are two options available to satisfy this requirement. One is provide information or documents that are directly responsive to the public request, or complete a written summary status report. The intent of the form is to provide guidance on the format when responding to the public request, and it's not required to be submitted to the department. The form can be found at the link provided above. And we realize the rule says the forms page. We are working to make a link to that form that appears on the public notification website. So in case you do look at the rule and you go to the forms page, it's not currently there. It's on the link that's provided on the slide. All right. Next slide. All right, subchapter 2 only had a few changes. The department has added the term annul to the rule language. The department will annul a response action outcome when it determines that the licensed site remediation professional, LSRP, is unable to withdraw the REO due to circumstances such as death, loss of license, or other medical condition. As per A5, in cases where a response action outcome is invalidated or annulled, the person responsible for conducting the remediation is required to continue remediation in accordance with the requirements set forth in ARCS. Okay, next slide. Okay, all events listed at 2.2a must retain the LSRP unless the remediation is being conducted at a federal facility, or remediation is only being conducted to confirm or evaluate a remediation performed or supervised by a licensed site remediation professional, provided that the remediation is not required pursuant to any other law or regulation, is not conducted to obtain an REO, and is not conducted to investigate, clean up, or respond to any known, suspected, or threatened discharge. This language was taken directly from SARA 2.0, so that's all new language. And as you can see above, hire was replaced with retain, as I mentioned earlier. And you're going to see that throughout the rule. So I'll give you a few seconds to digest the language. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so moving on to subchapter 3, as noted in the revised language, timeframes are tied to the site, regardless of changes in property ownership. Adjustments to regulatory timeframes will not be granted based on ownership status or transfer of ownership. Again, that's all new language from SARA 2.0. Okay, next slide. Okay, new language was added to 3.1 to make it clear that the department would not initiate direct oversight. 1, if the person responsible for conducting remediation is unable to obtain off-site access on properties not owned by them, provided that all appropriate and timely actions were taken to secure access. Or 2, if the site is under federal oversight. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of go over that language. Next slide. Okay, so the term entire site was revised to contaminated site to reflect that not all cases are required to undergo a full site remedial investigation. In 3.5, the phrase cause or causes was replaced with reason. To clarify some confusion identified during the stakeholder process, I think some folks were confused with what we meant by cause or causes. So when submitting an extension request, the justification should explain both the reason the original time frame was not met and the reason additional time is needed to complete the remediation. I will now skip to subchapter 6, and subchapter 4 is associated with fees, and most of the changes were related to the permits, which will be discussed later training. Subchapter 5 on with RFS will be discussed after my presentation. So we'll move on to subchapter 6. Next slide. So the next 2 slides cover changes to subchapter 6 to account for the indoor air remediation standards. The indoor air remediation standards have been added to the list of criteria that must be met prior to the issuance of a response action outcome under F. So that was pretty straightforward. Give you a few seconds to digest that information. Okay, next slide.
It's now time for our second test poll question. Remember, you have about a minute to answer the following question. True or false, indoor air remediation standards have been added to the list of criteria that must be met prior to the issuance of a response action outcome. Please remember that the pop-up for the test question poll may be behind your GoToWebinar window. It's been about a minute. Next slide, please. The answer is A, true. I will now turn it back over to Raphael.
All right, so moving on, under subchapter 6, indoor air has also been added to the list of criteria that must be addressed prior to the issuance of a response action outcome. Under G, if applicable, responsible parties must either remediate indoor air to meet the applicable remediation standards or obtain an indoor air remediation action permit. Details regarding the specific requirements and procedures for indoor air remedial action permits will be provided in an upcoming training session. Sorry about that. All right, so next slide. So 6.4 was updated to include enrollment. As previously noted, the department will annul a month's action outcome RAO when it determines that the licensed site remediation professional, LSRP, is unable to withdraw the RAO due to circumstances such as death, loss of license, or other medical conditions. If the department validates or annuls an RAO, the PRCR shall perform all remediation necessary. Okay. So again, that's just add an annulment to the 6.4. Okay, next slide. Subchapter 9, changes to the violation list and penalties were mostly related to Subchapter 7, which will be discussed during the next training sometime in February. So that's basically the only thing we have for Subchapter 9 enforcement. Next slide. Under 9.10a, department initiated actions was added since invalidations, annulments, or revocation of a permit are initiated by the department. So again, that's just to provide some clarity. And since those are initiated by the department, we added that additional language. Okay, next slide. And under 9.12a, the Spill Compensation and Control Act added to reference a statute that grants the department authority to pursue recovery of state incurred remediation costs. Again, that is just to clarify what gives the authority to pursue those costs. So that additional language was added. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions? If not, Jen McLeod will cover subchapter 5, remedial funding source updates. So.
Thank you, Raphael. We will now take some questions here. So first up, I have for the death was retained with someone parentheses an LSRP hired to do a peer review of another LSRP's work fall into that category.
Correct, and I think that was one of the response to comments. So I think what we wrote, yes, that would fall into that category. Right. Okay.
So instead of submitting a CD to fulfill the electronic copy requirement, you could just email the documents to srp_submissions@eep.nj.gov.
As long as it doesn't have an online service, correct. Any online services must be submitted through the online service. If not, if there's no online service for the form or whatever you're trying to submit, then you go to SRP submissions. Again, unless it's a form that requires a check, we require them to be mailed in. I know there's the initial RFS, but Jen can get into that a little bit. There's some forms that we need the originals to be mailed in. So yes, most cases you can submit most of them through SRP submissions if there's no online service. And also to add, it also, the rule says that, unless it's requested by the department. So we always have the option to request the originals if we have to. That's the way the rule was written.
Okay. So next up is, does the confirmed discharge notification replace calling the hotline?
No, you're still required to call the hotline, if there's a discharge. And that's just a form you have to submit through the online service to basically start the process. So it's still required. You're still required to call the hotline. You're still required to submit the confirmed discharge notification form through the online service, and that's what creates the case, and you can retain and start your submissions. So the process hasn't changed.
Is the LSRP required to respond to public inquiries associated with the third-party due diligence?
Well, due diligence I'm not getting into because that's kind of 2.4 kind of related, so I think we're not discussing that right now, so I rather just defer. until that process gets finalized. I mean, unless Judy or Lynn want to jump in, but I think when it
No,
comes
I
to
think you were talking about just like an off-site claim. Then, if if the contamination's from off-site, then you're not responsible for it once you prove that it's coming from an off-site source. But if you're doing any other kind of, we are not talking about anything having to do with due diligence here.
yeah, all appropriate inquiry or whatever you want to call it, but yes, that's
Okay, so the next question is, did I read that right, that an actual paper copy of the full deliverables has to be submitted with PWDI, etc. data now? What is the rationale for submitting hundreds of pages of paper?
unless my slide was incorrect, I think I said they're not required to be submitted. So I'm
Correct.
a little confused. Yeah.
Many DEP forms still say to submit electronic documents via CD. Is it okay to ignore this moving forward and use the email instead?
Correct. Right. And that's why we use the electronic format. I mean, I know there's a lot of forms. Our main focus was trying to get those forms that are more impacted by the rules, but we realized that some of the forms we have to go back and make some changes to, indicating that they have to be mailed in and our address. So that's going to be a work in progress. So we hope to get all the forms updated with better direction.
Will the removal of the term entire being associated with the term site in rules result in any RAO shell modification? Parentheses, E verse A.
Not that I'm aware of. It shouldn't impact any of the notices or the RAO process, whether the entire site or area concern RAOs. It should have no impact on that.
Shells what is in the rule is accurate. The shells that we have online should be, when you create your RAO, you should be using the ones through the online service. And that has been updated with the new rule language that appeared in ARCS.
Right. Right, and the change was that, not all, well, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, that is all the time that we have for questions. So next slide, please. Any unanswered questions will be answered via email after the presentation. Next slide, please. So next up, we have Jennifer McLeod, the section chief from CSRR. Take it away, Jennifer.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer McLeod. I'm currently the section chief in the Bureau of Enforcement and Investigations. However, I'm going to be covering the changes and updates to ARCS related to remediation funding source and financial assurance, since that's where I spent more than a decade for the last, probably almost 12 years I was in RFS. There is a new RFS coordinator. Her name is Jenna Fallon, and Vince Fasanella has been the financial assurance coordinator for a few years now. So please feel free to reach out to them with follow-up questions on this training. Next slide. So first, before we jump in, I want to note that most of the changes that have been made to Chapter 5 and also Chapter 14 are just to make ARCS in line with the changes that were already done in the updates to Brownfields and SARA 2.0, and also just to align ARCS with the standard procedures we've been doing. There's not really too much new in the way the rules are going to impact how RFS and FA have been functioning. So under 5.1, the first thing that we did was update the scope of the chapter to include use of a surety bond. Again, use of the surety bond was brought back through the changes in Brownfields under N.J.A.C 5810B-3I, and now the rules are going to be incorporated at Chapter 5.14. Next slide. So 5.2 talks about establishing RFS NFA, and we've just changed the language from a person who undertakes remediation to a person who is responsible for performing remediation, and added language about the responsibility to do so at either your present or former primary or secondary residence. This has to do with exemptions to FA as well, so this will be a key factor coming up. And number 6, again, is the owner or operator of a child care center who performs or is responsible for performing remediation at the present or former location of the licensed child care center. So previously, when you were required to establish financial assurance and you were doing it at your primary or secondary residence, or you were doing it at a licensed child care center, you had an exemption. But once you sold the property and it was no longer your primary or secondary residence, then you had to post financial assurance. With the changes to this rule, now you still retain that exemption once you sell the property. Next slide. So again, under 5.2 D, this is again talking about exemptions and requirements for posting FA. So again, the owner or operator of a small business who's responsible for performing remediation at the owner or operator's present or former business property, as well as the previous exemptions, are not required to establish financial assurance. So this is the same as the previous slide, where now once the person responsible for conducting remediation has sold the property, they can still retain their exemption for having been a small business at that property, and you do not have to post financial assurance. Note that the property owner, the small business owner exemption is only an exemption for financial assurance and not for RFS. Next slide. So under 5.2, under H is sort of where we list the mechanisms that you can use to satisfy RFS. We've renumbered them, so now loan or grant has bumped from number 5 down to number 7. Number 5 is now use of the surety bond, and self-guarantee is number 6. And we just had to redo the punctuation to note for the renumbering. Next slide. So this has to do with the biggest change, again, is in using the ability to have a surety bond and in the renumbering. So now in J, if you are the person responsible for conducting the remediation, you can use any of the mechanisms listed at H1 through H5 above to satisfy your financial assurance requirement. So that's not including a self-guarantee. That just, so you can understand how this is working. And then the financial assurance mechanism listed at 6 and 7 cannot be used for financial assurance. So if you can go back one previous slide, you'll note that 6 and 7 were the self-guarantee and the loan or grant. Go back to the other slide. All right, so 5.2K is where we get into direct oversight, and this is a big change for RFS and FA. So a person conducting the remediation at a site subject to direct oversight has to establish and maintain, where it used to say a remediation trust fund, it's now been changed to note that you can use any remediation funding sources listed in H above with the exception of a self-guarantee. This has been happening in practice if you've earned adjustments to direct oversight, and even sometimes with full direct oversight. So now you can use any mechanism except for self-guarantee. Next slide. So chapter 5.5 talks about the regulations for environmental insurance policies. And we've added language that when you're first getting an environmental insurance policy, it has to be issued for a period of at least 1 year. And then we've changed language to where it used to just say it cannot be revoked or terminated. It now says it cannot be revoked, terminated, not renewed, or canceled. And please any other synonym for this, add in here. The point is the department has to authorize the termination of an insurance policy with a written approval before it can be canceled by the insurance policy. And the only exception, as you see, will be on the next slide. The only exception to that is if the insurance company is going to revoke, terminate, not renew, or cancel, they have to provide a 120-day written notice. So 120 days before they want to revoke, terminate, not renew, or cancel, they have to provide written notice that that's happening, and then the department has that 120-day time frame to draw down on the RFS if need be, or the PRCR can get a replacement mechanism. We've also deleted the instruction that the insurance policy has to say that you can only disperse funds for doing, disperse the funds that are approved in writing by an LSRP. It's just because in practice, the insurance policies weren't allowing for disbursements to be done. And in taking out this language, it allows it to be used for direct oversight as well. Next slide. So finally, this is language again, and this is all trying to just shore up the fact that these insurance policies need to remain in place unless a replacement has been provided, or unless we've been provided the 120-day notice and we've been given an opportunity to draw down on the RFS. So hopefully you can have a chance to read through that. Next slide. Okay, so 5.6 talks about the requirements for a line of credit. Again, we've removed the language about doing disbursements from the line of credit to change it to mirror how the trust fund disbursement language was in the prior version of the rule. And this is because in anticipation of being able to use a direct oversight version of a line of credit, there'll be two different instances where disbursements will be done from a line of credit. One would be an LSRP approved disbursement, and that is when the site is under LSRP oversight, and then also a department approved disbursement when the site is subject to direct oversight. Next slide. Okay, so 5.9 just talks about when RFS mechanisms are subject to the annual 1% remediation funding source surcharge. And we had to add the fact that a surety bond is now a mechanism subject to that 1% surcharge. Next slide. All right, so most of the changes were made in 5.14 because we had to now add all of the requirements for use of a surety bond. Again, all of the requirements for surety bonds were already spelled out in brownfields at N.J.A.C 58:10B3I. There was also listservs or gov deliveries that went out for use of a surety bond for RFS. That was on October 1st, 2020. A subsequent gov delivery or listserv went out October 19th, 2020 for using a surety bond for financial assurance. All of the requirements are spelled out in both of those listservs and again here in ARCS. So the first thing is that the surety company itself has to be listed on the federal U.S. Treasury list of approved sureties. It is the Treasury Circular 570, not the Department 570. It's the Treasury Department Circular 570. It's a federal document. There's the link there, and that's included in the rules. And it has to not only be on the list, but they have to be licensed to issue sureties in the state of New Jersey. The surety bond itself should also include all applicable case numbers, the program interest, the name, the program interest number, the site name, site address, etc. Next slide. Continuing with the requirements, again, the surety bond cannot be canceled without prior written authorization from the department. And the surety bond has to say that if the surety company wants to cancel, they have to give us that 120-day advance notice so that we have opportunity to draw down on the RFS mechanism if necessary. It also gives the PRCR an opportunity to provide a replacement mechanism instead. Next slide. So 5.14b, this is similar to a trust fund, an environmental insurance policy, and a line of credit where we talk about they have to provide an annual valuation of the surety bond. It's a document from the issuing surety company that states that the surety bond is still in effect. It will still be in effect for the next 12 months and provides the current value of that surety bond. Next slide. Okay, so here again, we've made a change to subchapter 14 regarding compulsory direct oversight and the mechanisms that can be used. So under 14.2b to 2, it says that proof that the person has established and maintains, and instead of a remediation trust fund, which used to be the only option, it is now a remediation funding source pursuant to 5.2k. And in the beginning, earlier in this presentation, 5.2k specified basically any of the mechanisms except self-guarantee. And 14.26, you have to obtain the department's prior approval before making any disbursements from the remediation funding source. So again, not just from a trust fund, but from any of the funding sources you're using to, do the requirements for RFS for department direct oversight, then you need written approval. Next slide. Any questions? Well, I guess we're not doing, yeah, we are doing questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll begin the next question segment. We're coming up on time, so we only have time for a few questions. I'll start with our first one here. If the former owner of a property was a small business and sells it, is the new owner required to post FA?
Okay, so for financial assurance, how it works is there's always two co-permittees, right? So it's the person responsible for conducting remediation and the property owner. And so if the person responsible for conducting remediation and or the property owner at the time had the small business exemption and then sells the property, that new property owner becomes a co-permittee, and it would depend on if that property owner has an exemption or not. The prior seller would retain their exemption. So if they had an exemption before, once they sell it, they're still exempt. So then, yes, somebody else would have to post if the new property owner isn't also exempt. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, our next question here is, for reps where FA was established because a small business or other exemption was lost, can we terminate the FA if that exemption remains now?
Lynn, I don't know if you want to jump on. Do you want this to be handled in the RAP training session, or?
That's an excellent point that this should be covered. We'll make a note to cover this in the RAP session. But if because of the rule you now no longer have to post FA, you need to contact the FA unit to discuss that. We can't require you to have something if you're not required to have it.
Next question here is the 120-day notification of cancellation by an insurer included in the SRRA 2.0. If not, must a comparative requirement be initiated by the Department of Insurance to put it into force?
Thank you. So all of the RFS requirements are in Brownfields Chapter 3, and so there were updates made under SARA 2.0 for Brownfields. However, the 120-day notification requirement was not a new update. So that's not a new update. That's always been in there. The update to ARCs was just to expand the terms for what could be considered when they're canceling. So we had an issuance where, they said they're not revoking or terminating, they were not renewing, and then felt that they didn't have the requirement to send us the 120-day written notice. So we're just trying to broaden the scope of when you have to send us that 120-day notice to be essentially anytime this policy is going to be no longer in existence. So the 120-day notification is in brownfields already. It has always been in there, so we shouldn't need to do any further updates.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. That concludes our question segment, and I'll now turn it over to Jessica Schwartz.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Carly. Hello, everyone. I am Jessica Schwartz, an environmental specialist in the Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting, and also a member of the SARA 2.0 Rule Committee. Today, I will be presenting on the updates to the appendices of the ARCs. Next slide. The first change I will discuss is in Appendix B, which discusses the model deed notice. The department clarified and simplified language in the existing model deed notice regarding certifying entities and property descriptions. For example, as you can see in the red text, the phrase "in fee simple" was deleted because there are many other types of property ownership which may be applicable. Another example, again, can be seen in red text. Words such as "that was" and "is described" and some punctuation were removed to simplify the sentences and read more clearly. Next slide, please. Further, the department updated the signature requirements to be consistent with N.J.A.C. Title 46 property, ensuring that the model deed notice meets the statutory requirements for recorded documents. Essentially, different types of owner signature pages were replaced with a single signature section, which is applicable to all owners. If you can see in the red text, that is the deleted portion, and the bolded text is, again, the new version, the added language. Next slide, please. As Lynn mentioned earlier, the bullets shown on this slide are featured in the rule language and are not notes. The department has added the acknowledgement and proof section, which is filled out by a third party and will confirm the owner's information. This will take the place of specific signature pages for each type of owner. You guys a second to read some of this. Okay, next slide, please. Additionally, as you can see in the red text, in paragraph 12BI at Exhibit BA, the department deleted the listed examples from the description of as-built diagrams of each engineering control. This was removed because the applicable engineering controls are not limited to the examples which were listed. The regulated community is sufficiently familiar with engineering controls, and examples for clarification seemed unnecessary. Next slide, please. Similarly to the model deed notice, the department updated the model termination of deed notice. As a companion change, the department made the same signature requirement updates to the model termination of deed notice in ARC's Appendix C. Again, individual types of owner signature pages were removed and replaced with a single signature section applicable to all owners, and the acknowledgement and proof section was added, which will confirm the owner's information. Next slide, please. Moving on to deed notice in a remedial action. To be consistent with 711, the owner and subsequent owners now have 60 calendar days, previously 30 calendar days, to provide written notice to the DEP on a form provided by the department that change in ownership and/or rezoning has occurred. Give you guys a minute to read. Okay, next slide, please. For the next change, the department added 3 new notices at N.J.A.C 2726C in Appendix D, the Model Response Action Outcome document. The notices are the same as what is in the existing RAO guidance document, except for the addition of the GIS submittals on 2 of the following notices. The first notice that the department added in Appendix D is the transfer of monitoring well use, redesignated use, which allows for a monitoring well that was part of an investigation to remain in place even after the remediation for which the monitoring well was originally required is completed. In effect, the original ownership of the monitoring well is transferred to an unrelated contaminated site, which requires further groundwater investigation. The department added this new notice at the behest of the regulated community so that monitoring of contaminated groundwater may continue uninterrupted regardless of property ownership. This language is the same from the REO guidance. There will not be a GIS shape submittal associated with this REO notice. Next slide, please. The next RAO notice that was added is the indeterminate vapor intrusion pathway not yet investigated, which must be included when an indeterminate VI pathway, often referred to as IVIP, is identified. This notice is meant to ensure the disclosure of an ongoing environmental condition because of vapor intrusion. The department's purpose for this new notice is twofold. The notice is meant as a stopgap mechanism for ongoing soil gas issues, as well as a notice to the public and prospective purchasers of the site to ensure the accurate and timely disclosure of protective measures. If the LSRP cannot complete a vapor intrusion investigation due to the inability to collect representative indoor air samples, then the vapor intrusion pathway is considered indeterminate, which requires that a technical variance be applied to the building or structure. With the use of this notice, the LSRP must also submit to the department 1 electronic copy of a GIS-compatible map of the currently known extent of the vapor intrusion area identified in the notice at the same time of the submittal of the response action outcome, so that the regulated community is aware that vapor intrusion conditions exist at the site. Such information would be helpful to prospective purchasers of the site and nearby properties, notifying them that potential exposure risks are present since this notice considers limited public disclosure and awareness of this prolonged condition. This language is the same from the REO guidance with the addition of the GIS shape submittal. So there will be a required GIS shape submittal with the use of the IVIP notice, as well as the long-term monitoring notice I will discuss in an upcoming slide. Next slide, please.
Okay, and it is time for our third and final test your knowledge question. Remember, you have about a minute to answer the following question. The vapor intrusion long-term monitoring and intermediate vapor intrusion pathway status RAO notices now require a GIS shape submit. I will give you guys about 1 minute to answer that. And just as a reminder, there is a SurveyMonkey dropped in the chat on the side of your screens. When you guys have a chance after the presentation, can you please fill that out? That helps us create better presentations for you guys and get some positive feedback from you all as well. The answer was A, true. I will now turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you. The last REO notice added is the long-term vapor intrusion monitoring, which must be included when analytical results indicate that contaminant levels are above soil gas screening levels, but below the indoor air remediation standards. The purpose of this notice is to notify the regulated community of a condition that is threatening the health and safety of the environment. Long-term vapor intrusion monitoring signifies the potential for vapor intrusion to occur based on elevated soil gas concentrations. To maintain protectiveness of human receptors, regular indoor air monitoring is warranted until such time that soil gas concentrations no longer represent the potential for vapor intrusion to occur. Due to the limited public disclosure and awareness of this prolonged condition, the Department intends this notice to inform any interested party that the risk of vapor intrusion continues to be present. As with the indeterminate vapor intrusion pathway not yet investigated notice, this notice includes the requirement that the LSRP submit one electronic copy of a GIS-compatible map of the currently known extent of the identified vapor intrusion area at the same time as the submission of the response action outcome, so that the public and the prospective purchasers of the site are aware that vapor intrusion conditions exist at a site. Once long-term vapor intrusion monitoring is in place, a person should terminate such monitoring only with department approval, based on the sampling requirements outlined in Section 6.6 of the Department's Vapor Intrusion Technical Guidance. Long-term vapor intrusion monitoring should also include an annual inspection of the building to determine if there are any changes to allow vapors to more easily enter the building. If such changes have occurred, the person should conduct a reevaluation of the vapor intrusion pathway, inclusive of sampling. This language is the same from the REO guidance, with the addition of the GIS shape submittal. Next slide, please. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm Don Kramer. I'm with the Bureau of Information Systems, and I will discuss the requirements for the GIS submittal. Next slide, please. As Jessica discussed, the REO notice has requirements for 2 GIS submittals to the department. They are the indeterminate vapor intrusion pathway not yet evaluated, or IVIP, and the long-term vapor intrusion monitoring VILTM. The guidance on our GIS webpage has been updated to include these specific requirements, and we'll talk about that later. The submission of the GIS deliverable will be done via the DEP online REO service. During the service, you'll pick the REO notice selection screen. You will pick the specific insert that you are choosing for that notice, and then you will attach the GIS submittal during the attachment upload process. GIS deliverables will include a polygon shape for every building in the REO notice, and it will be of the entire building, not a portion of that is affected. So if you have a partially impacted building, you would submit the entire building, not just that impacted. Next slide, please. Within the GIS deliverable, each shape needs to have information attached to the attribute table. For each building, you'll have to submit, include the sampling date, the list of contaminants, buildings, address, and the parcels for that building. This is exactly the same as the information in the insert that you have included as part of the REO notice. Online GIS submittals are zipped up into a single file, and they consist of the GIS deliverable of the buildings. This can either be a shape file or a CAD file at this time. It will include a GIS metadata file, just a simple text file that we have on our webpage, which will collect information about the deliverable. And then attaching also a PDF map, a simple PDF map about the buildings that we can use to make sure that the GIS deliverable is what was originally supposed to be submitted. Next slide, please. Here's a simple example of something, a deliverable that would be submitted for 2 polygons, 2 buildings that were impacted at this fictitious site. One building, building 1 and building 2. You see at the bottom is the attribute table associated with the GIS deliverable. It has a type. In this case, it's an IVIP boundary, the sample date, the contaminants that are of concern, the building name, the address, and the parcels. This is a process that for all the CEAs, notice, and so forth has already been done. Next slide, please. Here's a quick overview of, I'm sure what everybody knows is the REO details of the service. And on the left-hand side is where you are asked the question, what inserts are being added. This is something that you see now. Next slide, please. So basically, if you will choose one of these 2, whichever one applies to your conditions, and changing the no to yes. And what this does is it will require a GIS submittal in the deliverable package. Next slide, please. So you've selected yes in the REO detail notice selection. When you come to the 14th screen, which is, or I'm sorry, the 13th screen, which is the REO upload screen. Next slide, please. You'll see depending on what you've chosen the IVIP, the GIS IVIP map attachment will be added. If you selected the LTM, of course, the LTM map GIS deliverable will be added to your selection. You'll just click on the choose file in the middle with the arrow pointing to it. A upload screen will come up, and I'm sure you've all done this through services. Simple process of attaching the zipped file. And this is why they have to be zipped, because you can only upload one file at this process. Next slide, please. So the takeaways in this is that you have to map the entire building that's affected. So if you have 2 buildings affected and one being partial and the other being the full extent, you would give the full extent of both buildings. Prepare the GIS submittal prior to running the service. You will have to have it already zipped up and ready to be attached during the service. I've included some links here. Contacts for any questions you have is the same contact number for any GIS deliverable that you, or any GIS question that you have for us. The guidance documents that have been modified to include this procedure, the one being the administrative requirements for GIS deliverables, which is on our webpage, the guidance document portion of the GIS section of the CSRR webpage. And then we've added 2 detailed instructions for these submissions. We've also included a template section, which is a shapefile that's already been created with no information. So you can download this template and you can then add the shape and the information attached to it. save it, and then submit it to us as part of the REO service. Next slide, please. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. We're going to turn it over for some questions, starting with, if indoor air is impacted from an off-site air release, will the indoor air still need to be remediated, and who would be responsible?
I got that one. As with any other situation, if you can prove that the contamination is coming from off-site and is not your responsibility, that you are not required to remediate any contamination that is not yours. You would have to prove that, just like you do now with any other contaminants.
Okay, the next question is, monitoring wells are owned by the property owner, not the RP. How is this addressed based on the rules change?
I assume you're referring to, go ahead, Lynn, if you want to. You look like you got something to say.
The monitoring well notice that is in the REO is allowing you the opportunity, just as it is right now in the REO guidance document. There's instructions there that say you have to get permission from the offsite to use their notice, their wells. It is not for the RP. This is that you have an obligation, that you have an inherent right to use it, rather, but you have to get permission from the other site to use the wells. And if you get that permission, you can then use it. We're just giving you the opportunity to memorialize that.
The notice is for the property owner to transfer, the ownership of the monitoring well to another property owner.
You don't have to do that.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, you don't have to. If you're using these wells and you want to install new wells, that's great. We're giving you an option of not having to install new wells.
Yes.
Okay, the next question is the new model deed notice available for download?
It is, the model deed notice is in the rule, that is in the register, but because that is part of the RAP process, that will be initiated in, you'll need to use that in February. So for the people who asked if they have an old one that's being in the process, still use that. If that's what you want, go ahead. It is in the rule right now. You can use the new version, but you don't have to. We will be training on that again in February.
Okay. Please clarify the requirement for FS for RAPs when a small business transfers ownership of the property. Do both the new owner and the former owner need to meet the exemption, or is it just to apply the primary permittee?
So let me try this and then you can jump in, Jen. The requirement, if there's a new property owner, that means you have sold the property and you have gone through that administrative process to transfer the site. There's a new owner. So the old property owner goes off and the new property owner goes on. Only one property owner is required to, would have the obligation. The old one no longer has it unless they are the PRCR. And then they would still have an obligation to provide the FA. Go ahead, Jen.
No, that's what I was going to say as well. So essentially, if one entity was the PRCR and the property owner and had the small business exemption and then sold the property and a new property owner came on, the small business owner, the original entity, would retain that exemption. But if that new property owner is not exempt, there is an obligation to post financial assurance. And I don't think we changed the rule that still one or the other has to post. Somebody does. Like, so, if the other person doesn't, and then even though you have the exemption, you may still end up having to post. But the point of changing it is that, like, you don't lose the exemption when you sell, because that was a problem. Like, you would sell the property, you would lose your exemption, and now you're being forced to post, even if the new owner had an exemption. It was a little.
Who is the contact for RFS documents to be submitted?
So when you're submitting your initial RFS documents, those have to be sent in hard copy to BCANE with a check if there's a 1% surcharge. And even if there's not, the initial submittal should still be sent hard copy. So BCAN can create your RFS and log it in, so forth. Once you are in your annual update phase, you can submit to the srp_submissions@dep.nj.gov. And then if you have questions, the new RFS coordinator, her name is Jenna Fallon, Phalon. If you haven't spoken with her yet, you will be soon.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Does the department still need to approve disbursement from an RFS if the site is under adjusted direct oversight?
Now, if you've earned adjustments, the LSRP can direct disbursements. And so the LSRP can direct disbursements from a trust fund or a line of credit. You use the standard versions of both of those model document mechanisms if you've earned adjustments. If the site is subject to full direct oversight, you need department approval on disbursements. You would be using the direct oversight version of the Remediation Trust Fund Agreement. And as we have been, we are in the works working on the direct oversight version of a line of credit agreement.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, that is the end of our presentation today. I would like to thank all of the presenters and everyone who has joined us today. It was great to come together and give you such a great training and update on the rules. A few reminders: please fill out the course evaluation at the link that is posted on your screen. It is also dropped in the chat as well. That is to help us create better surveys and trainings for you all as well. CEC information will be provided by the LSRPA. And with that, that should be everything. So everybody have a great day, and I hope you all enjoyed the training.